Hi, you're right. Welcome to Introduction to Rates of Reaction. This is your first lesson in the Rates of Reaction section, and please make sure to have a pen and paper ready for the rest of the presentation. So, your starter, what I would like you to do for 2 minutes, I would like you to draw how the particles are arranged in a solid, liquid, and gas. This is stuff that you covered in year 7. So just draw how the particles are arranged in a solid, a liquid, and a gas. So what you should have in your answer for your solids, liquids, and gases, how the particles are arranged, the solids, we should see that they are in a close proximity, so the particles are all touching, and they are in a neat, ordered structure. Okay, so they are all closely compacted together. Our liquids, we will see very similar structure in that the particles are all close together. However, they are not in an ordered structure. They are in a changing structure. That's why liquids are able to flow. The particles are moving over one another. In our gases, we should see that the particles are far apart, and you should also be showing that the particles are moving very rapidly. So particles in a gas will be flowing around their container very, very quickly. Okay, moving around very quickly. Another thing to note then is that with our solids, remember that they have a fixed shape and a fixed volume and they can't be squashed. With our liquid, they have no fixed shape, they do have a fixed volume, but they too also cannot be squashed. And then our last one, our gas, they have no fixed shape, no fixed volume, and can be squashed. Okay, now these particles are going to be important when we are talking about collision theory, which is one of our main focuses today. So just to run you through our objectives, what we want to cover today is we want to explain the term collision theory, we want to explain the effect of temperature on rate of reaction, and we also want to explain the effect of surface area on rate of reaction, and we'll go through what those terms all mean later on. So firstly, rates of reaction. Many chemical reactions are occurring around us and inside our bodies, lots at any one time. Now these reactions are essential for keeping us alive. I mean, just for example, respiration, your body using oxygen in order to keep your cells alive is running at a specific rate, and if you change that rate or slow it down or speed it up, that can have negative impacts on the body. Now rate is defined as the amount of product produced over time or the amount of reactant used up over time. So if you're not sure what those words mean, remember products are what we make at the end of a reaction, so the amount of product that is produced over a time, or the amount of reactant. Now reactant are the substances that we have at the start of a reaction, so we can measure rate in the amount of reactant, so the product, the stuff that we have at the start, and how much is used over time. Now we can measure this with different units, and they depend on what's being produced or what's being used up. Now typically what you will see is centimeters cubed per second, so that's typically talking about a volume of something, gases generally. And then we also have our grams per second. Now these two units are the most common ones when we are measuring rate. The underpinning theory of rate of reaction is collision theory. Okay, when we react chemicals together, the different chemicals will collide with one another and they will then react. Now, not all collisions lead to a reaction. So if you look at the diagram on the right, you can see that when we have an unsuccessful collision, the particles will collide, but then they will stay the same. There will be no chemical change that occurs. If we have a successful collision, however, the particles will collide and our reactants, those are the particles we have at the start, will form new products or new chemicals, and those are our end chemicals. Now there are some conditions that chemicals need to have in order for them to actually react when they collide. So for chemicals to react, the molecules need to collide with enough energy. So if two particles collide, but they haven't got enough energy to react, no reaction is going to happen. Also, some particles need to be in the correct orientation or correct position in order for a reaction to occur. That means that sometimes we'll have particles collide, but because they're not in the correct position, again, no reaction is going to occur. But what we can do is we can change how much energy particles have in a reaction, and that can actually influence how often we get what's called successful collisions. A successful collision is just where a collision has happened and a reaction has happened. So when we have more successful collisions, we have a faster rate of reaction. So what I would like you to do for me, please, is I would like you to try and answer this exam style question. Now it's a 4 marker, which means you'll need 4 minutes, so you're going to need to pause this video for 4 minutes while you answer. So what I'd like you to do is I want you to explain the term collision theory and how it affects rate of reaction. So we're going to review our answer then for question 1. So collision theory states that for a chemical reaction to occur, the reacting particles must collide with one another. So that's your first mark. The rate of reaction depends on the frequency of collision, so how often these collisions are happening. That's mark 2. Theory also tells us that reacting particles often collide without reacting. So it's important to note that just because the particles have collided doesn't necessarily mean that reaction is going to happen. For collisions to be successful, reacting particles must collide with sufficient energy and in the right orientation. So that is your 4th mark. Today, we're going to be looking at just 2 factors that directly influence rate of reaction. The 2 that we're going to be looking at are temperature and surface area, and I'll explain what surface area means later. You'll be familiar with temperature, but you might not know what surface area is. Next lesson, we're going to be having a look at concentration, pressure and catalysts, but today we are focusing on temperature and surface area. Those are the 2 that we're looking at. So our first one then, temperature. When we heat a reaction up, what we do is we introduce more energy to the reaction and in turn introduce more energy to the particles. Now this means that the particles inside our reaction are going to move around faster. It also increases the amount of energy that these particles have. Now this has 2 effects. This means that the particles obviously move faster, but they also have more energy, which means that more of them are likely to react when they collide with another particle. Remember that we need to have sufficient energy in a collision in order to have a successful collision and a successful reaction. So when we heat up a reaction, we speed up the particles' move, which increases the chances of collision, but we then also make sure that they have more energy, which increases their chances of having a successful collision. So more movement leads to more successful collisions, and therefore the speed of the reaction rises, which increases the rate. So if you have a look at the little diagram on the right there, you can see that the particles on the left are moving at a lower speed, and they've shown this with the smaller arrows, so they've all got quite small arrows. But if we increase the temperature, the particles move at higher speed, and that means that we're more likely to get more collisions. The particles also have a higher energy, which means that when they do collide with another particle, it's also more likely that they are going to have the necessary energy needed to react, and that will increase the amount of successful collisions, and this will lead to a faster rate of reaction. So for the next question, an exam style question, what I would like you to do for me, please, is explain how increasing temperature can increase the rate of reaction. Again, this is 4 marks, so you're going to need 4 minutes to complete it. So explain how increasing the temperature can increase the rate of a reaction. So the answer that we'd be looking at for this question When a reaction is heated, the particles have increased energy. That's your first mark. This means that the particles move faster. That's your second. And that more particles have the necessary energy to react when they collide. That's mark 3. Both of these factors lead to more successful collisions per second, increasing the rate. That is your fourth mark. Remember, when you've done your answers, if there are any pieces that you are missing, make sure to pause the video and jot down any marks on here that you have not got. So now we're going to move on to our next part. Now we're going to be looking at surface area. So this is the second factor that influences rate of reaction that we're going to be looking at today. Now, surface area greatly impacts how fast solids can react. Now, if you remember at the start of the lesson, I asked you to draw what the particles look like in a solid, liquid, and gas. If you look at the diagram on the right of the slide, okay, you'll see that on the left, we've got a beaker. Inside it, it's got some acid particles, it's got some water molecules, and it's also got some magnesium atoms. And it's the same in the little diagram on the right. However, there is a difference, and the difference is with the magnesium. So when we draw a solid, we typically draw lots of atoms in a neat ordered structure, all tightly packed together, because that's what solids look like. Now the thing is, when we look at collision theory, or when we're looking at collision theory in terms of a solid reacting with an acid around it, for example, we can see that those particles in the middle of the magnesium and the diagram labeled low surface area, we can see that the particles in the middle can't collide with any acid particles surrounding it. So all those magnesium atoms in the low surface area beaker, the ones in the middle are unavailable to react. But if we take that same magnesium and we break it into small pieces, what we can start to see is that those atoms that were in the middle, those particles in the middle that couldn't react, are now available on the surface. And that means that acid particles are able to collide with them. Now, when we increase surface area, what we do is we increase the amount of solid material that was in the center of our material, and we increase the amount that is now showing on the outside. We increase the surface area, and that means that more particles are available on the surface to react. So when a substance has a small surface area, less of the chemical is available to react on the surface. If it is broken into smaller pieces, material that was on the inside is now available on the surface, which means it can now collide with outside substances and react. It now has a larger surface area. More of the substance that is available to react will mean that more successful collisions occur, and this will increase the rate of reaction. So remember, when we have a higher surface area, that means that more of the particles that were on the inside are now available on the surface. That means that the other particles can collide with it, and that would increase the rate of reaction. So, what I want you to do now is our third exam style question for you to answer. So, a student is reacting magnesium metal with an acid. The student has two types of magnesium. These two types are powdered magnesium and strips of magnesium. Suggest which of these two types would react with a faster rate and explain why. Remember, this is 4 marks and you will need 4 minutes. So, our answer for exam style question 3. In this reaction, the powdered magnesium will have a faster rate. So that's your first mark, being able to identify that the powdered magnesium is going to have a faster rate. This is because the powdered magnesium has a larger surface area. That's your second mark. A larger surface area means that more magnesium particles are available to collide with the acid. That's your third mark. More successful collisions means a faster rate of reaction. That's mark number 4. Now, as I said before, remember, if you have not got any of those points that are on there in your answer, make sure to jot them down and add them to the answer that you have put down. Okay, so let's just quickly review what we've gone through today then. So our first objective was explain the term collision theory, and we know that collision theory is the idea of when we have a reaction, particles in this reaction are going to collide, and they need to have sufficient energy and they need to be in the correct orientation in order for a reaction to occur. If they're not in the correct orientation, or if they don't have a sufficient energy, the reaction is not going to happen. We then explained the effect of temperature on rate. So when we increase temperature, we increase the energy that the particles have. This means that they move faster, meaning more collisions, but also more particles have enough energy in order to react when they do collide. And then our last objective, our third one, is explain the effect of surface area on rate. When we increase the surface area of an object, so when we break it down into smaller pieces, more material is available on the surface to react with the other chemical. And because more of it is available, that means that more collisions can occur. More collisions, or more successful collisions, will lead to a faster rate of reaction. So remember, next lesson, we're going to be reviewing other factors that will influence rate of reaction. We're going to be looking at pressure, catalysts, and concentration. Thank you very much, Year 8.